What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Volunteer Tip Tuesday. My name is Adam, and every Tuesday I'm bringing you a video to help give you practical advice to help make you a better youth leader. Well, if you can't tell, my voice is a little bit weak because I lost it the other day and it's raining, but we are moving forward because I have a very important message that I want to share with you guys today. This is one of the most important things that you need to get as a youth leader, volunteer or paid. And I want to start with a story. Once upon a time, there was a baker. He started this bakery and he was very skilled at what he did. And so pretty quickly his bakery became very successful and very popular. Like literally he's making bread and he's making bagels and he's making all this stuff. But he didn't have a huge team with him. And so he was working hard, really hard, like barely getting any sleep, working, baking. Literally there's lines out the door, that kind of popularity. Every day he'd get there and there's like a line that you have to wait 20-30 minutes in line just to buy stuff from this bakery. Well, people loved it and they loved him, but pretty soon what started to happen is they noticed this baker, who was not a small fella, began to shrink. He was getting skinnier and skinnier and skinnier, and then people said, "Hey, are you okay? What's going on? What's wrong?" And here's what happened to him at the end of the story is that this baker, he says, "I'm so busy like making food for everybody else that I didn't have time to actually eat for myself." He's like, "Ain't nobody got time for that." And he didn't eat, and so he just cooked and made food for everybody else and served food to everybody else, but he never actually served food to himself, never actually ate himself. That story is an illustration called The Starving Baker. The Starving Baker story is an illustration of what can easily happen to us as youth leaders and as spiritual leaders for people in our world. See, what can happen is we get really busy trying to serve students and feed students and help students to grow spiritually and give them good spiritual content and growth and all this kind of stuff. But if we're not careful, what can happen is we forget to actually feed ourselves, spiritually speaking, if you will. Because we're so busy, we're trying to help them and answer their questions and lead them and guide them in their prayers and all this kind of stuff. And so that brings me to my point of today, is that if you're going to lead kids spiritually, you've got to make sure that you're connected to Jesus. Hold on, wind. Holy cow, this is like the world's weakest and cheapest and most lame umbrella. Oh my goodness, that umbrella was so horrible. I ditched it. It's not raining all that hard, so I should be okay for the next couple of minutes. Here's the point, guys. As youth leaders, we're not trying to feed kids bread or bagels or baked goods, but we are trying to feed them spiritually in a sense, and guide them spiritually and lead them spiritually. And so the Bible tells us in John chapter 15, Jesus says, "I'm the vine and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit." But then he says, "Apart from me, you can do nothing." When Jesus says in John 15 that apart from him we can do nothing, what he's talking about is bearing spiritual fruit, making a spiritual difference and impact in the lives of other people. That will only happen when we are connected to Jesus, like a vine is connected to a branch. If a branch is not connected to a tree, it is not bearing any fruit. And if you are not connected to God, then you are not going to bear any fruit spiritually. You're not going to make a real difference in the lives of your students. So the number one most important thing that you can do as a youth leader is to stay connected to Jesus. And I could do millions of videos on how to do that, but I think you guys know how to do that. If you're not connected to God, you're not going to, almost everything else is kind of pointless. So a lot of times this is just like a given in youth ministry. It's like, oh yeah, duh, of course I love God. Duh, of course I'm connected to God. Of course I have a good relationship with God. But sometimes we just kind of assume that, and then all of a sudden we let it go by the wayside. So this might be duh and obvious to you, but I just want to ask you as a question, how are you doing at being connected to Jesus? Right now, over the last week, month, year, how connected would you say you are in your relationship with God? Because if you're not close to God, man, well, what's the point of all the rest of it? All of it's important, but man, you've got to stay connected to Jesus. That's the number one thing. The number one thing that you can do to be a better youth leader is to get closer to Jesus. And so, anyways, I just wanted to remind you of that and encourage you that make sure you're building into your life daily routines and practices for you to stay connected to Jesus, to get alone with God, to grow spiritually on your own. What are you doing in your own personal life to grow spiritually, to stay connected to God, so that you can, then the life of God can flow through you to the students who you're trying to lead as a youth leader. Don't be like the starving baker. Be somebody who's filled to overflowing, and then out of that overflow, you're giving to your students the life of God that is in you. So you cannot give what you do not have, and if you do not have a connection with God, you cannot give that to students. Be somebody who's in love with Jesus and do whatever it takes to stay connected to Him. Do that. God will use you in big ways to make a difference in the lives of your students. Thanks for watching Volunteer Tip Tuesday. See you guys next week.